back to the Daily Grind. Thanks for checking out the channel. Make sure to hit subscribe if you're new and hit thumbs up if you're not a baby back pickle biting bitch boy, cause you know what time it is. It's full time.
MMA.
Everybody was kung fu fighting. Yo, where do I begin on this video? Let's get straight to it, I suppose. This is gonna be a quick recap of UFC 2, which I just got done watching. Nobody requested this one, you know. The UFC 1 recap was requested by my dog Aaron Burrell, but I took this one upon myself because I think I might just go through and watch all of them. I don't know if I'll recap all of them, but if you guys want me to recap them as I watch them, I might as well. I mean, I don't know when, blah, 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 blah. You get the fucking point. But I'm recapping UFC 2 since I already did UFC 1. So, with that being said, let's get to it, man. I watched this on UFC Fight Pass, by the way. You can watch like all of these on UFC Fight Pass. So, at the beginning of UFC 2, they flash back to UFC 1. Clearly, and it was actually the same year and in the same location, well, in the same city and state at least. Both of these fights were in Colorado, which is dope. You know, I didn't know Colorado had that much UFC history. The first two events, and I believe maybe even the third, will be held there, well, would have been held there. I haven't watched that one yet, but UFC 1 and 2 were both held in Colorado. They flashed back to UFC 1 and they, reminded everybody there's no weight divisions, no gloves, no pads, no time limits, no scorecards, no rules. In the first tournament, there were 8 different styles that clashed in a no-holds-barred tournament, which was won by the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu master Royce Gracie. This event, they're back in Denver, Colorado, and they also brought back 2 of the commentators from UFC 1, NFL Hall of Famer Jim Brown and also Brian Kilmeade. Brian Kilmeade revealed there are a couple subtle changes to this event. Instead of 8 fighters, there's going to be 16, and there will only be 1 round, no time limits, no rules. Now, the first 2 hours of the tournament were not recorded, but they showed, the picture of the preliminary round results, which I got for you there. And all the names in yellow came out victorious, and then they started the fight that you see right there, which they hadn't decided yet. That's where the tournament started. Royce Gracie versus, Minoki Ishihara. This was the only round that they showed of the very first round, the only fight of the first round. So that's where it started. Now, Ishihara was the smallest fighter in the entire competition. He was a karate fighter fighting Royce Gracie, of course, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu fighter. Ishihara, being the smallest fighter in the competition, he was still, they said, like a legend in Japan where he was coming from. He was 5'7". He wasn't much smaller than Royce Gracie, but I mean, Royce Gracie was fighting monsters. Royce Gracie's fought dudes that had like 100 pounds on him and shit. So, I mean, I was interested to see this fight, of course, because Royce Gracie was in it, but also one of the things that stood out to me was this guy's last name. Now, call me crazy, but whenever I saw his last name, the first person I thought of was Teruto Ishihara, a current member of Team Alpha Male. You know what I'm saying, Mr. I love my bitches. There's probably not any fucking relation here, but that's what I thought of. Maybe he's like a fucking descendant of that guy, which would give him a lot of fucking MMA history if that was true. Now, I don't know if that's true. That's just a side note I thought of. They've got the same last name of Ishihara. They're both UFC fighters. This was UFC 2. Now, this was the first fight. Big John McCarthy I don't think he was the referee for this fight, but I don't remember Big John McCarthy at UFC 1. There was a lot of Big John McCarthy refereeing here. He was a lot younger, of course. This was UFC 2. I was like, dang, this dude's been around since UFC 2. I didn't even know that. He might have been in UFC 1, but it's not standing out to me. So he definitely stood out here. So with that being said, the fight started between Royce Gracie and Minoki Ishihara. Royce Gracie used the oblique kicks to close the distance as he usually did UFC 1, you know what I'm saying? And before he shot for a takedown. Less than a minute into the bout, and he mounted Ishihara almost immediately after the takedown. After grinding Ishihara down with some palm strikes and a few body shots, Royce Gracie rolled into an arm bar, which Ishihara immediately tapped to before his arm was even fully extended. So the first fight ended in about like 2 to 3 minutes. Royce Gracie shot for a takedown, mounted Ishihara, got an arm bar, quick work. That was the end of the first round. In between the rounds, they showed some of the highlights from the fights that you didn't get to see in the first round that weren't like televised or whatever. And they showed some of the highlights, and they also explained that there was alternates in place just in case a fighter wasn't able to continue, even though like if they won but still weren't able to continue, they had alternates in place. So they also explained the difference between all of the fighting styles. They showed like a little minute or so, 30-second clip on karate, boxing, kickboxing, kung fu, grappling, and they showed in the grappling they included wrestling, jiu-jitsu, sambo, and then they had a category called exotic, which was pretty much ninja shit, ninjutsu and shit like that. So next, moving into the quarterfinal round, first fight, Pat Smith. He was kickboxing versus Scott Morris, who was exotic. He was American ninjutsu and shit. These guys looked like kooks, to be honest. If you just watched it, they looked like Joe Dirt got in the motherfucking ring, and I don't know, man, he watched too many karate movies. That's just what the feeling I got when I seen these ninjutsu dudes. But the fight starts. Both guys were relatively the same size. The exotic fighter realized really fast that his ninja shit wasn't gonna work here. He tried to charge at Pat Smith and take him down with some like technical ninja shit, but it wasn't working. Pat Smith hit him with a big knee and then fell on top of him in the mount and finished the fight really fast with some brutal elbows, pretty much breaking Scott Morris's face. The fight lasted a total of about 60 seconds. Pat Smith moved on to the semifinals. Next quarterfinal bout was between Johnny Rhodes, who was kickboxing / karate, versus Fred Edish, who was just like straight karate. But Fred Edish, one thing about him was he was an alternate, and Johnny Rhodes had supposedly, we didn't get to see the fight, but his first fight was like 10 minutes. They said he might be tired coming into this fight, so they expected Johnny Rhodes to maybe gas out and have a disadvantage coming into this fight versus the fresh alternate fighter, Fred Edish. Johnny Rhodes, though, won in the first round. I mean, all of these were one-round fights, but I mean, he won his first bout, came into this fight, and he was expected to lose, but he ended up making quick work of Fred Edish, actually. Johnny Rhodes landed some big shots, which opened up a cut above Fred Edish's eyes, and then he followed Fred Edish to the ground, ended up winning by submission with a rear naked choke. He didn't really have like the skills, the jiu-jitsu skills, like to know how to lock in the choke, but he did enough damage, and he ended up just getting his arm under the chin, which eventually the ref just fucking stopped it after 2 taps. So Johnny Rhodes won his second fight of the night and moved on to fight Pat Smith in the semifinals. So both of those guys that just fought were going to be facing off in the semifinals. Next, we had Orlando Witt, like a young Anderson Silva looking motherfucker. He was a Muay Thai kickboxing fighter. He was like a really high prospect in this shit. They said he was really, really skilled. But the problem is he was going against Remco Pardoux, who was a grappler, like a sambo type grappler. Remco had about 100 pounds on this dude, and the commentators didn't give Remco much of a chance. They suggested Orlando Witt will win this fight pretty easily, and that Remco may be tired from his lengthy first fight. So Remco did have a size advantage, but he had a lengthy fight in his first fight, and he looked kind of like Roy Nelson, so they thought his cardio might not be there. But he didn't need his cardio because they came into the fight. The fighters closed the distance. I mean, Orlando tried to, stay away from the big dude and hit him with a couple strikes, but it just didn't work. Remco closed the distance. They ended up in a clinch where the big dude Remco awkwardly fell on top of Orlando Witt. There wasn't many skills involved. As a takedown, he fell on top of him. He had his belly up. He was laying on top of him like with his back and shit, and threw a couple back elbows and knocked the dude out like brutally. He hit him in the temple, then a couple elbows to the face. This dude's out. So the ref stopped the fight. Orlando Witt, the favorite, got kind of fucking crushed literally in that fight. Just big ass dude fell on top of him. He tried to get up. Dude was kind of too big, threw some big elbows, knocked out the favorite, Orlando Witt, the fucking young. He reminded me of Anderson Silva. Like, they showed a lot of his training clips. Like, when they were showing training clips, they kept going back to his. Like, probably the first time they had seen a Muay Thai style, Muay Thai clinching and shit like that. So but he did get knocked out. Remco Pardoux moves on to the quarterfinals to fight the winner of Royce Gracie and Jason DeLucia, which is the next fight. Now, Jason DeLucia was a kung fu fighter fighting Royce Gracie, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, of course. Both fighters closed the distance, and Jason ended up getting a takedown on Royce. But Royce immediately pulled guard, and there was really no reason of going for a takedown because Royce is just way too skilled on the ground, whether you're in his guard or, Royce could have just fell to the floor and pulled guard probably on any of these guys, and then just ended up mounting them or taking their back, because that's what ended up here. Jason DeLucia scored a takedown on Royce Gracie, who pulled guard, used the guard to slide from under the less experienced grappler, and quickly reversed the position, ending up in a mount. Jason tried to create separation by pushing Royce Gracie off of him, which just gave Royce Gracie his arm to latch onto for another quick victory via armbar in this same tournament. So Royce Gracie moved on to fight Big Remco in the semifinals. Now, let's start semifinals. 4 fighters left. Patrick Smith kickboxing versus Johnny Rhodes kickboxing and karate. Patrick Smith, he fought in UFC 1 and lost via ankle lock to Ken Shamrock. They brought up that highlight, and he felt like he was the better fighter, but he was pissed off he lost to a leg lock. And the commentators were like, yeah, you gotta be mad when you lose to a leg lock. Like that's not the way people like losing. They'd rather lose to like a fucking rear naked choke than a leg lock. But he fought Ken Shamrock, lost to the ankle lock, and he's fighting Johnny Rhodes, who entered the octagon for the 3rd time in like 45 minutes. He was expected to lose round 2. This was the guy that was expected to lose round 2 because he had a lengthy round 1, but he scored that quick knockout over the alternate Fred Edish. Now, Big John was the referee in this fight, and the fight started with the filling out process. This was one of the first fights I actually seen like a filling out process. It wasn't just both guys charging at each other pretty much and ended up in a clinch. These guys had a filling out process, both throwing like inside and outside leg kicks at each other and a couple of punches. But as soon as the fighters did close the distance and got in the clinch, Pat Smith landed a big knee to the body, which bent Johnny Rhodes over. And when he bent over, it exposed his neck, allowing Pat Smith to lock in a standing guillotine that ended the fight. Pat Smith moved into the finals with that victory to face the winner of Royce Gracie versus Remco Pardue. Now, Royce Gracie versus Remco Pardue. Royce Gracie, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, versus Remco, who was more of like a grappler / combat sambo fighter. But they kept referring to him as a jiu-jitsu fighter, but I mean, when you think jiu-jitsu, I'm thinking Brazilian jiu-jitsu, especially in these style of tournaments. When they showed his grappling, it was more of like sambo style, like throw takedown, so that's why I keep saying sambo, but we'll just refer to him as a grappler. But we don't need to refer to him much longer because he's fighting Royce Gracie. Remco Pardue had about 85 pounds and 3 inches of height on Royce Gracie. Royce Gracie came in and shot for a takedown on the bigger Remco Pardue, who didn't go down immediately because he's so big, but Royce Gracie was now latched onto him and had his back. Royce Gracie just, tried to drag him down and use some strength and a trip to eventually get the bigger Remco on the floor, where he immediately took Remco's back and choked Remco out with his own gi. So now we move to the finals, Royce Gracie versus Pat Smith. Both of these guys fought at UFC 1. Royce Gracie was the defending champion. Pat Smith was looking like a dominant force, finished everybody in like under 2 minutes. This was going to be a great fight. Royce Gracie, this was essentially, to me, I thought about it because Patrick Smith was a little bigger. This was essentially like Damian Maia versus Gokhan Saki, like an elite grappler versus like an elite kickboxer. So that, and what happened here though, I mean, I don't know how that, and he was also bigger. So now, of course, this was back in the day when a lot of people had less of a grasp on jiu-jitsu. So nowadays, the bigger kickboxer could probably defend jiu-jitsu a little better than they did back then. But that is what this fight reminded me of, like Damian Maia versus Gokhan Saki, or I was going to say Francis Ngannou, but he wasn't that much bigger. But essentially a very talented, smaller grappler versus just a bigger dude that was really skilled in kickboxing. So yeah, with that being said, the fight starts. Patrick Smith closed the distance with like a leaping front kick, which Royce Gracie used to clinch Patrick. Royce Gracie scored a takedown from the clinch and then mounted Patrick, who tapped to strikes after a few big shots on the ground, preventing further damage. His corner threw in the towel. The commentators were like, yo, why did his corner throw in the towel? He's going to be mad. And then they realized that he actually tapped himself to strikes. Got up, they congratulated each other. Royce Gracie won another big fucking tournament, another UFC event. UFC 1, UFC 2, both won by Royce Gracie, and he said he'll be back for UFC 3 in September. And he also, people talk about trash talk and how there's no room for martial arts, and that's just not where the sport came from. You motherfuckers need to go back and watch UFC 1 and UFC 2. UFC 1, they were cutting promos a little bit on each other, Frank Shamrock and Royce Gracie, and UFC 2, Royce Gracie had that motherfucking Darren Till, Conor McGregor confidence. Like, anybody that thinks they can beat me, step step up. Ain't nobody messing with jiu-jitsu. All these tough guys, you know, in the magazines, they think they're tough. Come see me in the next tournament. That was a little bit of selling a fight. Like, man, who wants it? You know what I'm saying? So, hey, it was entertaining. It was a fun night of fights. UFC 2. I can't wait to watch UFC 3. I don't know when it'll be, so let me know if you guys liked this and if you think I should do more of these. If not, who really gives a fuck? I might do it anyway. It is what it is. Let the full-time Philly know what the fuck you tab in the comments. I'm out.
Da 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 da. It's the motherfucking D-O-double-G.